In this video, I was just going to go through the various blade options and what the various blades and when you may use the different blades. We have a table which is in the notes with this video, and it should be on the screen, just showing the basic details of when and where you should be using the blades. It's a rough guide showing from a soft to a tougher, more dense board, from a thin to a higher board, and it just gives an indication as to which blade you should be using where. There are basically 4 blades, 2 thicknesses and 2 cutting styles. Here we have the Tech D12. The D is for double-sided, so we have a bevel on both sides of the blade, and the 12 is the thickness, 0.12, that is 12 thousandths of an inch, or about 0.3 of a millimetre. Next to that is the same thickness blade, so it's a 12 blade, but it's a Tech S, which is a single-edged blade. So that just has the chamfer on one side and it's flat on the back of the blade. Next we have the Tech D15. D, again, double-sided blade, but this is a 15 or 0.15, 15 thousandths of an inch, slightly thicker. So we have a thinner blade and a thicker blade with the double edge. And then to finish the set, we have the Tech S15, which is the 15 thousandths, the slightly thicker one, again with the single edge. So we have one chamfer and one straight edge on the back. The thinner blade, the 12, that will give you a cleaner cut. It's easier to use, so you're trying to part less material when you're cutting the board. The 15, slightly more rigid, but again it takes a little more effort and doesn't give quite such a fine cut because it's a bit thicker, but obviously if you're cutting tougher material, that will probably be the one to go for. How we choose which blade to use is going to depend on what material we're cutting. Mount board comes in lots of different thicknesses and lots of different materials, from a standard board through to conservation through to a museum grade rag mat board. Most board we're cutting is going to be a standard 4-ply, around 1.5 millimeters, 1/16 of an inch thick. In that case, I'd be using the thinner blade. This is the Tech 12D. This is a good all-round blade, gives you a fine cut, and is certainly excellent for standard board. As boards get thicker or denser, you might find you start getting a hooking effect, which is where the blade is being deflected at the start of the cut, and then as you start cutting it straightens out, giving this sort of hook at the start. To prevent that, the next step is usually to go for the single edge blade. This changes just the characteristics of the way the blade parts the board and enters the board and runs when it's cutting. There's a little arrow pointing at which end of the blade to use, because with it being a single edge you can only use it one way round. The double edge, once you've blunted one end, you can turn it round and use the other end. You can't do that with a single blade, it's a single use, one end only. As materials start getting thicker, you may need a slightly more rigid blade, which is when we go up to the 15, slightly thicker blade. And again, it's like going back to the 12 blade. Probably start with the D15. If you start getting a problem there, then we go up to the S15. There's a lot of overlap. You can probably be using 2 or even 3 of these blades on any of these materials and they'll cut perfectly fine. But I would generally say the thinner blade, the 12 thou, using that up to about 3 millimeters. So with your thinner, softer boards, certainly the D12. As you go up in sort of the density or the toughness of the board, so maybe going up to a rag mat or a conservation board, you may need to find that you'll need to go to the single edge. As you get up to 3 millimeters or over 3 millimeters, that's when you'd probably start using the 15 blade. Again, starting with the double edge and progressing onto the single edge. There's a lot of trial and error because there's a lot of differences in thickness, even standard boards between different manufacturers. The actual depth can vary slightly, and the density of the board, particularly from cheaper, thinner boards, even though it may be described as a standard board, up to a conservation rag mat board. The blade I use most often, most of the board I'm cutting is a standard thickness, so about a 1/16, 1.5mm board, and my standard blade is the Tech D12. Thinner blade gives the finest cut, better quality cut. Being double-edged, it means you can use it twice, so basically you get twice as much usage out of this as you would with a single-edge blade. If I'm doing things like V-grooves or start cutting, say, 2.5mm board, I'd probably be thinking about using the Tech S12. Certainly for V-grooves, that is very good for cutting the reverse bevel on a V-groove. You don't need to use any spacers or anything, you can cut it straight with the 12. I don't do very much cutting over 3mm, so I rarely use the 15 size. So generally for my all-round blade, it's the Tech D12. And then when things start getting a bit thicker, I'm going up to the Tech S12. And certainly that's good enough for 3mm. I personally rarely cut anything over 3mm. Also, if you want to go into a bit more detail to understand the engineering and the sort of technicalities of how a blade cuts into the board, there will be some more detailed notes in the description that's alongside this video.